Okay, we're on Orlah, Perek Bet, Mishnah Vav. 6th Mishnah in the 2nd chapter of Orlah. Okay, this Mishnah is going to go, this Mishnah and the next Mishnah are hearkening back to something we just said in Mishnah Dalet. Let's go back to Mishnah Dalet for a second. The Mishnah said the following. Okay, so we have said that there's a measurement of bittul for, let's say, truma, and we said truma and Orlah and Klai HaKerem truma was 1 in 100, and Orlah and Klai HaKerem was 1 in 200. But then we said there's another rule that if it's mechametz or metabel, if it's tangible, there's chametz in it. It means it leavens or it adds spices, and even if it's less than 100, then we're asur. So our Mishnah is going to continue on this. So we have two measurements for bittul. Is it 1 to 100? Okay, then it's batel. Let's say we're talking about truma. If it's 1 to 100, then it's batel. That's on one hand. But even if it's not 1 to 100, if it's mechametz or metabel, if it's noten tam, if you have time to it, if it's tangible, it's also not batel. Okay, I'm going to show you a chart that I made in order to illustrate this point. Okay, here we will just understand here. If it's yesh bo kedei lechametz, i.e., the stuff that you put in, the seor you put in was enough to make it leavened, then it doesn't matter if ein bo la'alok be'echad hamayah. So if it doesn't have enough, if there's too much chametz, i.e., too much leavening agent that it's not even batel 1 in 100, then for sure it's asur. But even if it's yesh bo, even if it has more than 100 to 1 in the chulin in order to make it batel, it's more than 100 to 1 of chulin to truma, for example, or whatever, it's still asur. Why? Because yesh bo kedei lechametz. That's what our Mishnah is going to say. But our Mishnah is going to qualify it and say that's only in a specific case of min b'mino. Says the Mishnah, ulema amru, in which case did we say, kol mechabetz, v'metabel, v'medameh lahachmir, that if it's as long as it's mechametz, metabel, medameh, it's machmir, then it's only min b'mino. Lahakel lahachmir, but when do we say that there's a possibility of having a hakula and a chumrah? That's min b'she'eno mino. Min b'mino means two of the same species. If, let's say, for example, truma of wheat starter fell into wheat dough, or that's min b'mino. Whereas min she'eno mino is, let's say, corn fell into wheat, as we'll soon see, and then we're makel and machmir. Ketzad. So what's the case of kol mechametz v'metabel l'hamedameh l'achmir? Says the Mishnah. Seor shel chitim. If I have seor starter, I have leaven of chitim made from wheat dough. Shenafal l'toch isat chitim, and it fell into dough of wheat. V'yesh bo kedei lechametz, and it has enough to make it leavened. Okay, so meaning it has enough to make all the dough rise. Even though it's a tiny amount. Bench that the Mishnah says, bench yesh bo la'alot be'echad u'meya, whether there's enough chulin to be mevatel. Let's say there's 200 times the amount of chulin than of truma. Or bench she'ein bo la'alot be'echad u'meya, it's not asur. Then it's totally asur. Why? Because it has bo yesh bo kedei lechametz. But, so, ein bo la'alot be'echad u'meya, let's say even though, okay, but in the case of where there's not enough chulin, it's not 100 to 1, then again, ben sheyesh bo kedei lechametz, ben she'ein bo kedei lechametz, asur. Then even if there's not enough, whether it's enough to make leavening for sure, but even if there's not enough to make it leavened, it's still asur. Let's say a very weak starter. The starter is enough to make chametz. It's like a dying starter. But if it's not at 1 to 100 to 1, it's still not patel. So we're machmir in both directions. Let's look at my chart again. Here, we said, yesh bo kedei lechametz. So if it has enough, if the starter is strong and it makes it chametz, then even though, for sure, if ein bo la'alot be'echad u'meya, meaning there's not enough chulin to be mevatel 100 to 1, for sure it's asur, there's no bittul. But even in the case where yesh bo, it's 100 to 1, since yesh bo kedei lechametz, then it's still asur. The second part of the Mishnah said, the following, remember the second part, we said, ein bo la'alot be'echad u'meya, if this column, if there isn't 100 to 1, i.e., meaning there's 50 to 1 of chulin to truma, and I want to know, is my dough batel? He says, in that case, again, whether yesh bo or ein bo, whether it's not enough to be mechametz or not, since it's still less than 100 to 1, less chulin than 100 to 1, it's still asur. The only time it would be mutar is if, in min b'mino, in wheat is, if I both have 100 to 1 measurement and ein bo kedei lechametz. That's the only time, that's the only situation in which it would be batel. But the Mishnah says we're machmir in this direction and in this direction. When? Only in the case of min b'mino. Why only min b'mino? Let's look at the Bartenura just for a second in this next Mishnah. he says the following. Okay. D'ba'inan mea hainu davka chitim bechitim. Why do you need 100? If normally the halacha follows tam. Okay? Meaning if you could taste it, if it's sensible. So normally in cases where there's not spices or what have you, spices are very tasty, you can taste them anywhere. But normally if I mix my, let's say, milk falls into chicken soup, we say that's b'netinat tam. And Chazal gave, we know, you've heard the term batel b'shishim. That batel b'shishim is netinat tam. Okay? So how come we're more machmir in this case, even if it's in min b'mino? Das mechua akra. Et mikdasho mimenu. There's a Torah, the Torah says, et mikdasho. That was from its hegdesh. Masha atar merim mimenu. That which you take out. What do you take out? It's talking about, we've learned this before, that's talking about a case of trumat maaser. What's the measurement of trumat maaser? 100 to 1. 1/100th, because you take a tenth of a tenth. And that goes to the Kohen. Mata merim mimenu, im nafal tocho mikadsho. So that same measurement, if it fell back into the mixture, it's mikadesh, it sanctifies it. But that's only min b'mino. That's only in its specific case. So it's like a gzeirat hakatuv, that even in the case where ein bo kedei lechamet, the tam is not tasted. It's not, you don't feel it in the dough. If you don't have 100 to 1, then the Torah says in that case it's asur. And this is the unusual one. This is the one that's not obvious, but we learn it from the Bartunura says a gzeirat hakatuv. We'll stop here. We'll continue this idea, this second chart in the next Mishnah, and we'll dedicate the learning to the memory of my father, Rav Simcha ben Yitzchak Kalman. You can contact me at this email address. Have a good day.